related to Lee's Ferry. I know Lee had tons of kids and tons of grandkids, but I do have a last name that might fit many of you in the room. It actually could mean craftsman of the river, because it's Bilderbeck, so builder of rivers. I think what that really means for me is I had an ancestor who dug ditches. I'm pretty sure about that. Definitely wasn't that they were a river guide, but but I changed over from working at the National Park Service Regional Office to be the Chief of Science and Resources for Grand Canyon this year. Came in at an incredibly hard time, right in the middle of the Dragon Bravo fire, and then we had a 43-day shutdown. But I got to tell you, I'm really glad to be here, and just wanted to speak a little without slides. Just you know, I talked with others about today, including Wayne, to see what he was going to cover, and I felt like I really needed to talk a little bit about what some of these changes mean to us at the park and where we probably need your help. We're entering a completely new time period. I think Wayne mentioned, some of the past planning processes, things like LTEMP. I looked back at that last night. The chances of falling below power pool, I think we're rated at about 1% back then in 2016. It was looked at as a really remote possibility. And this is the first time that it's right there on a 24-month study. And I mean, Colorado River is kind of all about hope. As I was talking about what I might say today with some of the staff at Reclamation, they said, "Oh God, you're going to kill all hope." So maybe I'll just share what some of my concerns are, but maybe I'll try and end on some good news. So if anybody has any of that, if you could bring it to me, I'll read it at the end. That would be fantastic. But I think for Wayne, when he became the regional director, if anyone had told him how many giant planning processes he would have to do in record time and how many decisions would have to be made in a year like this, I don't think he would have taken the job. He probably would have run away screaming. But I'm really glad he did, because I don't know if and this is saying something, because there have been some really fantastic directors for the upper Colorado region, but I think we're really lucky to have someone who's not only super smart but also really has his heart in the canyon, and I think that's important at this time. But I don't know if Wayne can really tell us what things are going to look like a year from now, and that really scares me. That someone as smart as him might not be able to, because I think we're entering a time of more uncertainty, more forks in the road than we've ever had. And so just wanted to talk about a few of those. Having worked a lot on the LTEMP and designed a lot of the alternative that we ended up using, just wanted to highlight that in that, a really big part of the strategy for managing the canyon was to have frequent HFEs. And in fact, the alternative that was selected under that was supposed to have 21 HFEs in a 20-year period. And we are 10 years into that, and we've had 3 HFEs. So that is really disappointing to me as someone who wrote it. But it's because we have been going lower and lower on Lake Powell. And that is something that brings up a lot of conflicts. As we as National Park Service spent a lot of time about 2 years ago looking at the future and trying to figure out what was important for us to try and do with the river, we came to a really quick conclusion. If we cared about the river segments, the trick was trying to have reservoirs with enough water in them to manage the flows the way we wanted to. Because when the reservoirs get really low, there isn't the water there to manage the flows the way we would want them for the environmental issues. It's pretty hard to have a peak flow if there isn't water volume to do so. So the HFEs in Grand Canyon at the GCMRC annual review meeting, as we went through topic by topic with the USGS partners, there was a very clear theme that came out. Like, there are effects to vegetation that are very negative from having a lack of HFEs. We have less and less coverage of cultural resources in the canyon because we don't have the sediment for it. And the sediment itself as a resource, we are worried that we're starting to mine into pre-dam sediments at this point. So mine out sand that's been there since before Glen Canyon Dam was built. So in the last 3 HFEs that were triggered have not been implemented. And so we have this opportunity that's coming up here, possibly in June, for 4 out of 4 for that. Or maybe an opportunity for something that's a small HFE. Maybe the first one we've done in June ever, which would of course be the natural timing for a peak flow. That would be a really interesting experiment. And it's not the worst year for a shorter HFE. We have lower flows this summer, less erosion. So there are some real opportunities with that for learning. But we do have, I think Wayne was pretty frank with you about the difficulties associated with this. So just wanted to remind folks, that the, of course, Grand Canyon Protection Act, is just something for you all to remember. Maybe kind of like a shared prayer. Maybe we could just do this real quick. Let's see. Please repeat after me. The secretary shall operate Glen Canyon Dam, blah, 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 in a manner as to, everybody with me, protect, mitigate, adverse effects to, and improve the values, for which Grand Canyon National Park, and Glen Canyon National Recreation Area were established, including, but not limited to, natural and cultural resources and visitor use. So
Cultural resources and visitor use.
So a whole lot of people got together back before 1992 to help write that language. And one of the things I really love about Wayne is he actually has his staff start out a lot of meetings with reading that, or at least quoting parts of it. And, the LTEMP really conceived of this decision-making process every year for HFEs, but the intention was that if we reached the sediment triggers, that the experiments would go forward unless there were, unacceptable adverse impacts that would occur to other resources that we knew about. And of course, what happens is when the lake level gets really low, that is when a lot of those conflicts come up. When there are questions about fish versus sand, or hydropower versus HFEs. When the reservoirs higher, all of those conflicts disappear. Also, this year, particularly, we're reaching a time where to do a long HFE would bring up a new conflict that Wayne mentioned. If we ran a really long HFE, we would hit really low flows because you have to borrow the water for that HFE from the weeks around it in the month. I don't think there's any danger of too long of an HFE being run this year, and I trust that Reclamation will craft a proposal that will be very, very reasonable. And past HFEs have generally cost $1 million or less for short ones. If this was a shorter one by far than others, probably would be maybe a fraction of $1 million. So those are just points of information that I want you to all to know about. We as the Park Service see that value for rebuilding the beaches. The reason I'm here as the Chief of Resources is because I was trained by Jan Balsam, who many of you know has been talking about retirement for years and is still here because her heart is in the canyon. And, she has taught me that. And now my heart is here. So, and we need your help if we move into a time period where we can't do HFEs. And I guess I'm very concerned that if we can't get even a small one this year to happen, that we need new strategies, and we might need your help crafting them. Because HFEs are really the only tool that we have to rebuild sediment along the bottom of the canyon, to keep conditions there the way it has been, since the Colorado River has been in the Grand Canyon, which has been a very, very long time. I don't know where Carlstrom is, but we were talking about that a little earlier today. But as the only tool for that, that has been also our way to protect those cultural resources. People have been living along the river for a very long time. So there's a lot of archaeological resources very close to the river. A lot of them we didn't know about until the dam was built. And why did we know about them after the dam was built? Because the sediment started eroding away, because the dam was blocking so much of the sediment. But because of that, we went through, the years before the 1995 EIS, learning about it, developing that HFE protocol, and then using that as a way to at least protect some of the sites along the river by keeping them covered. If we can no longer do that, then that means when you bring a group of visitors along the river, they're going to start encountering a lot more cultural artifacts. And we as the Park Service want to protect them. You all want to protect them and care deeply about it. Our tribal partners are very concerned, about what that will look like for the future, and really want, your help, our help to convey the respect for those resources out there so that they are treated the way we would want them treated. But like say, I really think our major tool for managing that is about to go away if we aren't able to get an HFE this year, because I don't know what the future looks like, but I'm going to tell you the things I'm worried about. It doesn't mean I know that this is how it will go. And Wayne can jump in if he knows differently, but we're not seeing any agreement between the states up here, and some of the operations that are being considered this year, which is, by the way, the most operationally complex year ever for reclamation. They had to adjust winter volumes using a DROA shift. Then they've had to contemplate this new 6E function to reduce the flow out of Glen Canyon Dam, and then consider a DROA further upstream, and consider an HFE that might occur during the cool mix period. So it probably, like if someone had gone back 10 years and told reclamation that all that would occur in 1 year while there were negotiations going on about what the operating regime would be for October 1, I don't think they would have believed it. That is a lot of moving parts in 1 year. But given all that, and given the projections of what the flows might be, I think there probably is a way to do a short HFE this year. But if that's something that you care about, I just want you to know how we're thinking about it as the Park Service. But the thing I'm worried about is that we might be in this same spot for a decade easily. If the states don't come to agreement, I'm not really seeing how things change. We all know, the inflow is changing and it's changed dramatically over the last 25 years. But what hasn't changed as much is the consumptive use. So that ratio is really determining how much water is available. So if the states don't come to a negotiated agreement, we keep going down. Now, if reclamation really wants to avoid running on the small tubes, the bypass tubes at the bottom of the dam, then they are trying to maintain that 3490 and above. But there's not a lot of tools for them to stay above there. There's only two levers to pull. Either you borrow water from upstream, mostly from Flaming Gorge, or you restrict flows out of Glen Canyon Dam. So what I'm worried about, I won't say I know this will happen, but what I'm worried about is there's not a lot of water upstream to borrow. And if you start borrowing, I think Wayne referred to having some caution on how much is borrowed from upstream from places like Flaming Gorge, because if you borrow too much, how much water will be available the next year? And then for restricting flows out of the dam, we have done that in the past to maintain a buffer. Now we will have no buffer on the dam. If we're below 3525, hovering just a little above that, we've had years where we've had a 50-foot vertical drop. That was a pretty exciting ride in 21-22 period where reclamation watched the changes occur between the April, May, and June 24-month study. So that very rapid drop is very problematic when you don't have a lot of buffer. So if you only had two levers to work it, what I'm concerned about is that we may experience even lower flows in the future to maintain that level. So just want to set this expectation that we're at a really critical time where without that agreement between states, I think reclamation only has a few options for how they try and manage things. And that's going to put us really stuck in the middle, literally and figuratively as Grand Canyon. We're in the middle of what used to be the two biggest reservoirs in the United States. We seem to be working our way towards changing that status. And we are between, the 7 states arguing over this. So I'm also just really, really concerned about what happens this year with the fish. Emily Omana on my staff will speak tomorrow a little bit more about the fish, but just want to talk about the cool mix that Wayne mentioned. We had 2 years of smallmouth bass coming through the dam in training because of the warm level in Lake Powell coming down closer to the outlets and passing the fish through. And because of that, we started seeing smallmouth bass breed in the canyon. And why is that a concern? Well, the 2018 Fish and Wildlife Species Status Assessment said smallmouth bass was the biggest threat to the future of humpback chub. And of course, Grand Canyon is home to 95% of the humpback chub on the planet. It's also home to 4 other native fish, 1 other federally listed. But those are the 5 native species that are left out of the 8 that used to be here in the Grand Canyon. And the Grand Canyon is one of the stretches of the river with the least fish predators. So, but without pool mix, we're very likely to have smallmouth bass established below the dam. And I've worked for 30 years on invasive species issues. And once an invasive species gets established, it is nearly impossible to get rid of it. And the costs for it are extraordinary. So incredibly unlikely if we let smallmouth bass get established that we'll be able to do that. So, for us, for Grand Canyon Park staff, especially fishery staff like Emily, it's very, very concerning if we don't use the one tool that we have right now that has shown itself to stop the reproduction of smallmouth bass. So I was waiting for somebody to come with that sticky with the good news. Did anybody forget? But you know, I do think for the future there is some opportunity in planning for a river that's going to probably have lower flows. You know, it's a different type of use. For small businesses, that's a challenge for you all. But I do think some of the questions that came up earlier about how might monthly volumes be changed is something that I'm sure Wayne will want to address in a follow-up process after the post 2026. So it might be a really good time to consider a survey of preferences on that. And there might even be agreement with other groups like with WAPA about where to put some of that volume. As we move into a hotter world, it may be more important to try and generate hydropower during the summer rather than the winter. Because the reason the winter volumes used to be high was because they needed it for additional power needs during the winter. So there may be an opportunity to change some of that. There may be an opportunity for some of the upper reaches of Glen Canyon and Cataract Canyon to recover. I think, you know, it's also going to be really challenging at places like Lake Powell as it drops down further to maintain water quality, to deal with a really big bare shoreline and changes in use and exposure of cultural resources and paleo resources, things like that. But maybe there is some good news in there of nature coming back, taking us more towards a river. So maybe now's the time to start re-envisioning that. And we want to work with you. We want to work with you, and you know our communications and tribal affairs folks are set up over there. So for thoughts on how to better protect those cultural resources that might get more exposed. So I'm here, and my heart is here in Canyon. I'm going to be here a long time as the science and resource chief. I consider that an awesome responsibility in a place like this. So look forward to working with you. And I just hope there's an HFE and a cool mix this summer to manage our incredibly important resources in Canada. Thank you.